architect of modern Odisha, Gopabandhu Das, Nilakantha Das, you name them, they were all products of Ravenshaw College. So we can't imagine modern Odisha without Ravenshaw. Fortunately for us, Ravenshaw has found a very good historian. The history of Ravenshaw has been brilliantly written by Dr. Nivedita Mahanti, who herself is not a Ravenshawian. She never studied in Ravenshaw. Perhaps that gave her an objective perspective on Ravenshaw, because if I would write it, I would be very, very emotional. I would be very, very subjective. So Ravenshaw, the temple of learning, Odisha's temple of learning, a history of Ravenshaw College, is a fantastic work of history. Gives us an account of the genesis of this great institution. So, and how it grew into, got transformed into a university. So that story has been fascinatingly, enthrallingly told by Dr. Mahanti. So anyone who is interested in the facts and the trajectory of Ravenshaw should read that book. So you will find fascinating things about Ravenshaw. For instance, not many know that Ravenshaw, in the first few years, first 5 years, not a single student of Ravenshaw could succeed in passing a FA examination. So many people thought that the college should be closed, Ravenshaw Collegiate School. It derives it for a long time. I didn't know why Ravenshaw Collegiate School was called Collegiate. Then when I read this history, I realized that 2 classes, FA classes, were opened there. Therefore, the school came to be known as Collegiate School. Later, of course, it became a degree college in 1875 or around that time. So I think had someone from Odisha been the principal, he would have immediately decided that it's time the college should be closed, because for 5 years, no one passed the FA examination. That was a scandal. Everybody thought that, well, 5 students should be given scholarships and they should be sent to Kolkata. But the principal, Samuel Ajer, was absolutely unfazed. He said that let's wait. In the 5th year or 6th year, one Durga Charan Sahu or someone passed the FA examination in the 3rd class. And the principal was so elated, he declared a holiday for the college. That shows that the institutions need a lot of patience. Impatient people can't build institutions. Similarly, in 1919, when Ravenshaw, the present infrastructure of Ravenshaw, the building in which Ravenshaw is housed today, was, I think, built in 1919. Perhaps it was shifted in 1921 or around that time. And then suddenly, because Ravenshaw, the present building of the Ravenshaw, is located near Jobra and Sankarpur, and these areas, many students found it extremely difficult to find accommodation in that part of, because at that time, in the early decades of the 20th century, it's the Chandini Chowk and that area where Kotak Printing Company was established. That area was prosperous, and students coming from villages could find accommodation easily. And suddenly, the number of the enrollment went down, and Madhusudan Das, no less, Brajasundar Das, these people started complaining. They called it a brick and mortar barrier to learning. Again, they sounded extremely pessimistic and thought bad days were ahead of Ravenshaw and nothing good is going to happen. But again, people who were at the helm of affairs in Ravenshaw continued without feeling pulled down or put down, and then Ravenshaw came to prosper and make its mark. And Batheza, I think, who was the principal of Ravenshaw, gave this resonant title to Ravenshaw. He described Ravenshaw as the modern temple of Odisha. I think, if I remember rightly, in his address on one occasion, he said that the pilgrim, when we were students, we knew that the road which ran past Ravenshaw towards the bridge in Chhatra Bazaar was called Pilgrim Road, but we didn't know why it was called Pilgrim Road. We didn't really bother. But then I found after reading this history that it was actually the pilgrim route from West Bengal. The pilgrim route passed through Cuttack and reached Puri. So this pilgrim part of that road is still called the Pilgrim Road or Pilgrim Street or something. So he said that, well, people who, there is another temple now in Odisha. For a very long time, you had only Jagannath temple dedicated to Lord Jagannath, who is our presiding deity. And then now, this majestic edifice, Ravenshaw, I think, has one of the most beautiful buildings. Whenever I think of Ravenshaw, I feel overcome with emotion because such a beautiful building. Whenever I walk down the corridor, I feel memories welling up inside. So, such a beautiful building. And imagine in 1921 or 22, someone passing, walking past that building, it must have struck awe in him. He must have been inspired by awe, left him awed by its majestic structure, by its majestic architecture, beautiful and majestic architecture. So he's said that this is the temple of Odisha's temple of learning. Jagannath temple is spiritually significant to Odias or extremely important to Odias from a religious point of view. But from modern Odisha, this was the temple of learning. So that was extremely important. So if you read that history, one gets to know so many things that an Australian architect who designed Muzaffarpur College, where Kripalani, J.B. Kripalani was a teacher in 1915 during Gandhi's visit to Champaran. He was professor of English there. The same architect has built Ravenshaw. And you find striking similarities between these two wonderful institutions, architectural similarities. So you get to know a lot of fascinating things about Ravenshaw. That's not really very important from our point of view because anyone can now pick up a copy of Dr. Mahanti's book and read it. But the Ravenshaw that matters much more to us from another point of view, we can know about from another source, a friend of ours, the common friend. He's also a close friend of Deepak Babu. Dr. Sangram Jana has written or compiled a volume which he calls in Odia Ravenshaw ka Antaranga Itihas or Ravenshaw Intimate History. I think that's what is extremely important for us who had the good fortune of spending a few years of our life, formative years at Ravenshaw College. And here he collects, Mr. Samantrai talked about my passion for collecting autobiographies. I have collected nearly 340 or 50 autobiographies in Odia and English, written by Odias in Sikha Sandhan. And many of them, nearly 50 of them, have something about Ravenshaw College. Because anyone who is someone in Odisha, that was true at least 50 years ago or 40 years ago, must have passed through the portals of Ravenshaw College. So it had left such a powerful imprint or impact on their lives that when they recounted their lives, when they reconstructed their lives through the memories, by revisiting their memories or recounting the past, Ravenshaw inevitably figured very prominently in their autobiographies. So he collected all those 40 or 50 excerpts and put them together in one volume. And it's a priceless possession because they open up perspectives on Ravenshaw, which archival records will never do. Archives can only give us dry as dust facts, and we have to breathe life into them as historians, which Professor Dr. Mahanti has, of course, done. But when you look at this intimate history, you begin to see Ravenshaw, what should I say, bathed in the light of nostalgia. And things that no official history could offer will be found in these excerpts from autobiographies. For instance, I can immediately think of one very interesting anecdote. Not many of us know. I have asked many students of the Department of English in Ravenshaw or students of the Department of History. Not many know that E.M. Foster's Passage to India, which is an iconic novel, one of the most important anti-colonial works of fiction, in a way to undermine the colonial structures. And this novel was dedicated to someone called Sir Syed Rasmasood. Not many know that this gentleman was the grandson of Sayyid Muhammad, the founder of Aligarh Muslim University. He was his grandson. He was tutored by E.M. Foster. He was a Latin tutor. E.M. Foster was his Latin tutor when he went to London and prepared prepared himself for the entrance test to Oxford, and became very close to E.M. Foster. So this novel is dedicated to Sir Syed Rasmasood. And Rasmasood was a professor of history at Ravenshaw for 2 years or 3 years. I don't know the exact number of years, but he was posted to Ravenshaw, and he was a professor of history there. Not many people know this, that we have this connection with Foster and connection with Aligarh. So this is a very important piece of information, and we don't really bother about it. So I started looking for material on him and found it extremely difficult to locate any material on Rasmasood's connection with Ravenshaw. So what I did, then I went through this Ravenshaw, an intimate history edited by Dr. Sangram Jena, and I came across one excerpt written by, or one article written by uh, Lala Nagendra Kumar Rai, who was a journalist, was an encyclopedist. He wrote an encyclopedia and published it in 1936. He says in this article that he was a student of Sir Syed Rasmasood. And Rasmasood has this funny habit as a teacher. He would, long before open book exams were in vogue or came to be practiced, he allowed the students to carry the questions home, take the questions home, and use textbooks or reference books, use them and write their answers. But there was one condition: the pass mark would be 70%. So this fascinating nugget of information I found again in Ravenshaw, the intimate history. So you will get so many such pieces of information in Ravenshaw, an intimate history. For instance, Shamacharan Tripathi, not many know that the beautiful lawn quadrangle of Ravenshaw College, where we find flowers blossoming in winter and such a beautiful sight, this quadrangle was made possible by Samachandra Tripathi, who was the principal, the first Odia principal of, first Indian principal of Ravenshaw College. Before him, either it was a Bengali or it was an Englishman. So he was the first. IES, perhaps the Odia Indian Education Service. The second one was Professor Parija. And he asked students to carry the very loamy soil from Karjodi, the Karjodi riverbed. They carried it to the college quadrangle, and the sandy soil of that was enriched with this rich, fertile, loamy soil, and the beautiful garden could be, the beautiful lawn, the beautiful garden could be created. So Samachandra Tripathi was a very hefty man, well-built person, a big-boned and well-built person. So one day on the corridor, he met a student who was very thin, looked very, very emaciated, ill-fed. And then he asked, "What's your name?" He said, "My name is Samachandra Tripathi." So he was shocked. The principal was shocked. He said, "People would feel shocked if they see such a hideously thin boy bearing my name." So immediately called the doctor, college doctor, and said, "Give him vitamins, give him some medicine so that he puts on some flesh, so that will justify the name Samachandra Tripathi." So I can go on multiplying these instances, but I think that's not what I have in mind today. I have something else in mind. I would like to talk about my own experience of Ravenshaw, because my own experience of Ravenshaw is not very different from many like me, but like Mr. Samantra said, the context is extremely important. Like many other Ravenshawians, I think I experienced Ravenshaw from a unique angle or unique perspective. I was a village boy. My perspective on Ravenshaw is that of someone who came from a village to Ravenshaw, to Katha in the 1970s. And the 70s again was a very difficult time. 70s was a time of great uncertainty. If you remember, only within 2-3 years you'll have emergency. You had Bangladesh war. You had serious economic crisis afflicting people. There was great political instability, and there was Cold War at its peak. Vietnam war was unfolding only a few thousand kilometers away, and we were in the midst of Cold War, and there was great political and cultural instability. There was great sense of insecurity, and as I often tell my friends, that was the time around 1974. Educational institutions in Odisha also faced a great crisis because institutions like JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and later many centrally funded institutes came up all over the country, and suddenly students, bright students from Odisha started migrating to Delhi. So we had this crisis of confidence. So great deal of political turmoil, economic crisis, Cold War, and the rise of glamorous academic institutions in Delhi. So students started leaving for Delhi in droves, and we experienced a crisis of confidence. So this is broadly the context, but I'm talking about my own journey to Ravenshaw. I came from a village in the district of Puri, not very far from Bhubaneswar, but it felt millions of miles away because in those days we didn't have electricity. Transport was a great problem. And being a resident of Puri district, our destination usually was SCS College Puri because that was our major town and everybody went to receive. If they could afford it, they went to SCS College Puri. So my elder brother went there. Two of my elder brothers went to Puri. They studied in SCS College. So everybody thought that after we passed our matriculation exam, we would go to Puri and study in SCS College. So that was taken for granted. But then things changed for me. My elder brother was doing his MA, his BA as a student of English honors, came to Ravenshaw because Puri didn't have postgraduate courses in English. So he studied in Ravenshaw, did his MA in English, and then took up a job in Katha. He joined a medicine company, Alembic medicine company, and stayed in Katha. So once he settled in Katha, my sisters also started studying in Ravenshaw College. And then after I passed my matriculation exam, my destination was also Ravenshaw College. So this is an accident, a very happy accident, but accident nevertheless, because otherwise I would never have spent 7 years of my life. In our time, MA took 3 years because we wouldn't like to pass. We wouldn't like to sit for our exams after 2 years. We would go on strike. So I spent 7 years of my life in Ravenshaw. So Ravenshaw is a part of me. I have been taken out of Ravenshaw, but Ravenshaw can't be taken out of me. So then I came to Ravenshaw to study pre-university science. I was a student of science for 2 years. But even before I came to Ravenshaw, as a student, I knew Ravenshaw. I was conscious of its importance. I was conscious of the glamour associated with Ravenshaw because my brother and his friends would visit our village during the vacations, during the college holidays, and they would talk about their teachers. I would overhear them mentioning their teachers with reverence, almost as if a young man today would be talking about Shahrukh Khan or some or Hrithik Roshan or Salman Khan. They were talking about Professor Prafulla Pati or Professor Sarveshwar Das. They would be talking about these teachers with ill-concealed reverence. So these names were familiar to us. And even as students of village schools, we had access to Odia literary magazines in Odia, like Jhankar, like Asantakali, like other literary magazines, in which we found lots of teachers of Ravenshaw contributing. Learned articles, stories. So underneath those articles, you would find Adhyapak, Ravenshaw College, some subject, Ravenshaw College. So we knew of Gokulanand Mahapatra, read his science fiction. We read articles written by Sarat Mahanti or Jagannath Shah. They all contributed to Jhankar. So Ravenshaw was present to us. Although physically we didn't know anything about it or hadn't experienced it. And the other thing is that Cuttack appeared to be a great city. If you looked at Cuttack from the perspective of a village boy, living in a world where there was no electricity, people even didn't know how to wear slippers, and so Cuttack was our metropolis. Today, it might not appear to be a very glamorous place. People who have gone to Delhi or abroad or Bombay might find Cuttack a larger village. But to us, who came from villages, Cuttack was again a great city, a city that intimidated us, a city about which we had heard a lot. For instance, even in a childhood, Kotaka Sahara, Thabala Tagara, Kotaka Sahara, and white flowers or something like that. And later I remember Sitakan Mahapatra or someone saying, Kotaka Sahara, Zahi Pute Dukhankara, Thabala Tagara. So Kotak was part of a very glamorous universe. And we thought that we would appear very, very rustic, very, very unsophisticated, very, very crude, very, very rustic in that very sophisticated world, because whenever somebody came from Cuttack to our village, we thought that they are very, very sophisticated. The way they talk, the way they dress themselves, the way their range of references to things intimidated us and impressed us to no end. So when I arrived in Ravenshaw as a student, I have some vivid memories. The first thing that I remember when I entered the college, my elder brother, took me there. I took admission. He must have talked to his friends, and I don't remember going to the clerks or anyone. The admission had already been taken place. Then in that crowd, I found the place extremely crowded, and I was scared. And then I found my brother paying his respects to, greeting reverentially, a very handsome man. And then he told me that this man is Sarat Mahanti, and he was first gold medalist in mathematics. So that was my first introduction to Ravenshaw, that here are people who are gold medalists. Here are people who inspire awe and reverence in my elder brother. And the other thing I also vividly remember is a tiny bust. As we entered the college, there was a tiny bust, Sahid Pradeep Misra, or Pradipta Misra, because in 1969 strike, I think he had been shot dead by the police. And later I knew that on that occasion, the principal, Dr. Devendra Chandra Mishra, was hit by the police, and Professor Sarveshwar Das also was badly beaten by the police and sustained injuries. So that was, again, my introduction to another aspect of Ravenshaw, that it had been a witness to lots of violence. Even as students in villages, we were affected by 1969 strike, but this image sticks in my mind, sticks in my memory, because this bust of Pradipta Mishra, I remember vividly, Sahid Pradipta Mishra. And then I stayed in a hostel. So the perspective of a village boy who was overawed by Ravenshaw, the architecture dwarfed me. In fact, I lost my way in the first day. I lost my way. I couldn't find my way to PLT or CLT and re-emerged near the office once more because everything seemed symmetrical and I didn't find my way. And everybody appeared to be more sophisticated, smarter than me. And I felt very, very diffident, very, very unsure of myself as a village boy. So I stayed in a hostel. I remember the first day, it was raining, and in the Konica library, I think that's where I lost my way because East Hostel looked like West Hostel, and I couldn't find my way to CLT looked like PLT. So I was at a loss. I lost my bearings. So then I remember the long, I think, rods. The fans were suspended by means of very long rods. That's what I remember. And Konica Library, I didn't even dare enter it. It appeared so uh, forbidding a place, so scary a place because all those books, hardbound books in glass cases, uh, put the fear of God in me. I suddenly felt illiterate. But then again, I remember my brother, elder brother, not the one who did his MA in Ravenshaw College in English. Another brother, his younger brother, who became a doctor, he never studied in Ravenshaw. He told me that now you are going to Ravenshaw College, and there you can read Encyclopedia Britannica. So even if he was a doctor, this is the image of Ravenshaw he had, that we had never seen Encyclopedia Britannica. We had seen only Ganamandala in our village, which was edited by Vinod Kanungo, and we had come across the expression Encyclopedia Britannica there, but we had never set our eyes on a set of Encyclopedia Britannica. Truth to tell, I never read Encyclopedia Britannica during my 6 years, 7 years in Ravenshaw. But when I was a student of MA, I was translating Kishori Charan Das's short stories as part of my MA dissertation. Then I went to Professor Mahendra Raut, who was the principal, and I knew him very well. Around that time, I had already become I was um, indirectly elected president of Ravenshaw College during emergency. So Professor Raut was extremely fond of me. So one day I went to him and told him that, sir, we don't have the latest edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. And Professor Raut, next day, to my shock and what should I say, amazement, there was a brand new set of Encyclopedia Britannica in the study center, and I started devouring some entries. So that was an unforgettable experience. Ravenshaw, Encyclopedia Britannica, and the connection between the two, and my elder brother telling me that if you are a student of Ravenshaw, you will be able to read Encyclopedia Britannica, which I read after spending 6 years in Ravenshaw College. So that's another. So let me come back to my experience as a boarder of a hostel, because I lived in new hostel. Not many students, many of my friends actually stayed in East Hostel and West Hostel. But we thought that luckily for me, I was put up in, I was given admission in new hostel, which I found a modern place. The conveniences were available, and East Hostel and West Hostel, people told me that their toilets were horrible. So thank God I never stayed there. So I spent 4 years in New Hostel and 3 years in Tribal and Rural Welfare Hostel near New Hostel. So largely, I spent 7 years in and around New Hostel. So my first day in the hostel, I felt very homesick. The food was awful. The rice stank to high heavens. And I nostalgically thought back to my days in my village where at least the rice tasted so good. And I remembered my mother, my parents, sisters, and brothers, and really felt miserable. But in the evening, I think there was a hostel function. And I heard someone delivering a speech in impeccable English. And he was talking about, he was reciting lines from W.B. Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. The mere anarchies loosed upon the world, something like the best lack conviction and the worst are full of passionate intensity. That was Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. And he went on to talk about George Orwell's Animal Farm. So I was enchanted. I was completely overwhelmed. It was an experience I can't define, I can't explain now. So then I found that the person was speaking such impeccable English and were talking about W.B. Yeats, about W.H. Auden, about George Orwell's Animal Farm. All this, this gentleman was one professor of physics of Ravenshaw College. He was trained in Cambridge. He had a PhD from Cambridge, and his name was Professor K.S.R. Bhutti. So this came as a revelation to me. This was my exposure to the exciting intellectual world that Ravenshaw opened up to a village boy like me. I started reading W.H. Auden, I started reading Solzhenitsyn, I started rereading George Orwell. So all these things I started doing because I listened to this brilliant lecture by Professor K.S.R. Murthy. And after maybe a month or two, he taught us physics as a student of science, as a very bad student of science, although did extremely well in the exams. But I was terrified by the subject, and the teacher should threaten us. The teacher should tell us that if you're not good, go to the arts department. This is not the right place for you. So actually, that wasn't the right place for me. Once I passed my first degree, the science exam, I fled to the English department. I migrated, I escaped into the Department of English. And that was a great relief to my perhaps science teachers and to me. That was good for science departments and better for me. So I left the science stream and came to arts department. I started doing BA in English honors. So Professor Murthy came into our class, a physics lecture theater, dimly lit hall, I remember, and then the peon would bring his briefcase or whatever, the attendance register. In the arts departments, the teachers would carry the attendance register and come into the class, walk into the class. But in the science departments, always a peon would carry the duster and the attendance register, and the professors or teachers would follow them. So there, Professor Murthy was talking about some subject in science. I have forgotten whatever, gravity, or I don't know. I don't remember. I have happily forgotten everything that the science teachers taught me. But I distinctly remember that he talked about Penelope's scroll. He was actually talking about the Greek epic Odyssey and using that to explain a problem in science. So that was a fascinating experience. We had teachers like that, and then gradually I got to know more and more such charismatic teachers who are permanent fixtures in our memory. I mean, it's impossible to think of Ravenshaw without thinking of those great teachers. They're all so charismatic. Then we attended classes by uh, Dr. Say Professor Altaf Hussain. In his classes, we would find even students of chemistry, physics, zoology, because they were all fascinated by Professor Altaf Hussain's lectures. Wonderful sense of humor and wit, his devastating wit, and such a pleasant, such a soothing personality. So we would just listen to him enchanted, enthralled. Then we had one professor who had a very distinguished appearance. I mean, we couldn't take our eyes off him. He was Professor Vivekanand Mukherjee. He looked like Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, and he would be walking from his quarters, which lay near Taldanda Canal. And I was told that some rickshawalas stayed in his house. He was so charitable, so generous. And he would be walking to the college, and everyone would be treating him with great reverence, great respect. And one day he came to our, and we'll always find him sitting in front of Professor Raut's principal's quarters, because he was a great friend of Professor Raut, and would be watching him, sitting there in a huge armchair and sipping tea. So one day he came to our department. He is also a great friend of Professor Sarveshwar Das. So in the annual day or something of our department, English department, And he spoke. And what a speech he gave, what command of English language. So these are, and we used to take him to Barune or wherever the English department students will go on a picnic. Professor Vivekanand Mukherjee, who was professor of Bengali, he would be accompanying, or he would be pressed by our students to accompany them, because he was a permanent fixture of our department, and in every function he would be there. And we had teachers like, let me think of Mahapatra Nilamani Sahu, Kolok Bihari Dhala, and all these people. We had read their works when we were students of high school, and then we suddenly saw them in person. So, so all these charismatic teachers, like Santanu Acharya was a teacher of chemistry, and Hrudanand Rai, and so these people, Santanu Acharya, Hrudanand Rai, and Mahapatra Nilamani Sahu, would be inseparable. They would go to South Indian hotel, and they would be talking all the time, and we would be overhearing their conversations. So this was one phase of Ravenshaw, that we had all these great teachers. And if any teachers recognized us, behaved as if they, because it seemed such a crowded place, there's so many students, it was impossible. We couldn't expect any teacher to remember our names or anything, our face. But sometimes some teachers would be very kind, and they would refer to us by our name and just stop on the way and greet us. If we said, greeted them respectfully, they would also ask us a few questions about our well-being, personal problems, and then we would feel overwhelmed. We thought that our day was, that made our day. That was one phase of Ravenshaw. The other thing is that in Ravenshaw, sometimes whether we attended classes or not, there was a glorious, I think, kind of ambience, a tremendous milieu in which one observed ideas from all possible corners of the, because so many important people came to Ravenshaw to deliver lectures. For instance, a series of lectures were delivered by people like Krishnakant, Balraj Madhav, Tarakeswari Sinha. Then one day we listened to Pillu Modi, and he would address all of us saying, ladies and gentlemen, future chief ministers of Odisha. So we all felt elated. Every one of us thought that one day we'll become chief ministers of Odisha. Thank God we didn't. That would have been a disaster. But we felt elated. Subramaniam Swami came and delivered a fantastic lecture. So all these ideas, all the things they say, and their magnetic personalities enriched us in invisible ways. And I remember that in those days, the gallery, the new convocation panel had been constructed yet. That was constructed around 1977 or so, 76 or 77. So in that gallery, jam-packed, then Tarakeswari Sinha, very charismatic politician, spoke wonderful Hindi. And then one student gave a catcall because rowdy elements were there. Then she stopped and she said, she didn't feel upset at all. She didn't throw tantrums. She didn't behave as if she was insulted, felt insulted or humiliated. She just recited a sayari. I'm not very good at Urdu, so bear with me. What it meant is, हमको उनको आती है हमारा प्यार पर गुस्सा, हमको आती है उनके गुस्से में प्यार. Something like that. My Urdu is awful, so please forgive me if this is absolutely wrong. So I vividly remember that. And I not only remember all these great speeches given by Professor Bhavatos Datta, Subramanian Swami, or all these great leaders who came to Ravenshaw. I remember some of our students. Some Ravenshawians are so bright. Let me digress a little and talk about the milieu of 1970s. I think brilliant students were worshipped in my time. We all felt, strangely never felt inferior to them, never felt intimidated by them. We all worshipped them. We never felt envious of them. All of us wanted to do well in exams and placed among the top 10 students, and we didn't succeed. That's one part of the one side of the story. But everybody worshipped brilliant students. There was one such brilliant student, some of you might remember him. He was Lalit Kumar Panda, and he had topped the matriculation exam, then the pre-university exam, then the first year degree exam, and we would go and peek into his room in the West Hostel. From a distance, we would look into his room, and we would sit in this very frail, short young man, seriously working at his studies, at his desk, and we would look at him and come away feeling awed, at the same time thrilled that we have, he didn't know us. We were talent wherever we found it. And legends were created. Everybody talked about the students who had passed through Ravenshaw as if they were legends in their own lifetime. So I think I have already spoken long enough, so I'll just recount a few more anecdotes and come to bring my presentation to an end. So I was talking about the brilliant students of Ravenshaw, whom we can never forget. In 1971, when I entered Ravenshaw, I think I entered 71, then the Bangladesh war took place. And there was a lot of debates about whether India should have joined that war or not. India should have impinged upon the sovereignty of another nation. There was a very thin, young, dark-skinned boy who was Bengali, I think. In a debate, he challenged, he criticized India very sternly for infringing the sovereignty of another nation, that India has no business to be doing this, marching into another nation's terrain and territory. And so this is something wrong. And everybody was angry with him. But I remember that he stood his ground. So that kind of, I remember this brilliant young debaters. And I still remember, I think vividly in 1973 or 74, in this college union function, and there were 3,000 students or maybe 4,000 students. One of our classmates was president of, in his third year degree, BA third year, he was the president of Ravenshaw College Students Union. And he spoke and he gave a lecture, the presidential speech, and he left us spellbound. His name is Fakir Mahanti. He died, unfortunately. He's my classmate. He died only 4 or 5 days ago. I can't believe my ears that someone, a student of a government school, Ravenshaw Collegiate, and he spoke with such fluency. And the words, I still vividly remember the words he used to, founder or something like that, the words which we didn't have at our command. We didn't know how to use such expressions. And later, when I came to know him a little more well, he was talking about Ogden Nash. He was talking about Bakunin the anarchist. That as a 20-year-old young man doing his BA in Ravenshaw, that was the level, intellectual level he had attained. So we had many such friends, exceptionally bright. And I still remember the debates we used to have among ourselves and the wonderfully witty and insightful things very young people could say. Like one day, one of our friends who was a student of physics, he said that you students of literature, what can you do? We can say, I'm a student of electronics, I can make this radio. So one of my friends said that, okay, after you make that radio, who will sing there? Who will tell stories there? Who will read news there? You physics students can't do this. You are utterly useless. You can only build that machine. I still remember how witty our friends could be. Or in another argument, one of our friends argued that, well, in India, we shouldn't bother about poverty, we shouldn't bother about anything, we should give everything to the army so that they'll protect us. So one of my friends asked him, protect what? If everyone is dying of starvation, what would he protect? So I still remember these brilliant exchanges among very young people. and the quality of mind they reveal. And Ravenshaw also had a very, very vibrant cultural uh, milieu. I remember in 1975, for instance, I think in Ravenshaw, even when we are just pre-university, first-year degree students, we would watch Samrat, which was actually an Odia adaptation of Camus' Caligula. And I remember Gobind Tej had built the stage. He had designed the stage. He was a great stage designer, and we attended. We watched that brilliant play. And Caretaker of the Birthday Party by Pinter, it was staged on the stage of Ravenshaw. And what I can never forget is the fact that in 1975-76, when emergency was at its most terrifying, that was the time when a play written by Sartre, Men Without Shadows, was adapted into Odia. It was about French resistance and terrorism and all that, but it was a veiled attack on emergency. And in Ravenshaw, Professor Jain Patnaik, Jitu Patnaik, adapted it in Odia, and it was staged on the convocation panel. And even if we knew little about existentialism, we knew little about French resistance, we found that this play was hauntingly pertinent to what was happening to us during emergency. So that was Men Without Shadows. I forget the Odia title. And everyone was obsessed with the print culture. That was the Ravenshaw I knew. Everyone was trying to print something, publish something, bring out a magazine, however short-lived. In New Hostel, for instance, I remember one 1 year senior to us, Mr. Ajay Mahanti, brought out a magazine called Bindu Abara. Must have run it for only 2 or 3, maybe 1 year or so. I was part of 2 initiatives. One was a magazine edited by a senior friend of mine, Manoranjan Das, Sanskriti. We brought out 3 issues. And then Ultra, an English magazine. And I remember we brought out the Ultra for about, I think, 4 or 5 issues of Ultra. And I remember a very funny experience, sobering experience, because in those days we took interest in, we thought that we should translate Odia literature into English and make it, bring it international recognition. So I translated a very famous story by Vibhuti Charan Tripathi, I don't remember, Vibhuti Bhushan Tripathi, a very famous short story writer. And I wrote to him for permission. He thought that a postgraduate student or a lecturer in English is translating this, so he generously gave me permission. And I had very poor command of English, and I translated it into English, and it was published in the Ultra. And when it reached him, he wrote a stinging letter to me, and that really made me wake up. I realized that my command of English is absolutely poor. I have a long way to go. And although it was very painful to read that letter, he said that you have made a mess of my story, you don't know English, I should never have allowed you to translate my story into English. That was a great learning experience. I became very, very careful every time I translated anything into English. So that was a great learning experience. So that was the Ravenshaw. Everyone was trying to bring out, and the college, the hostel magazines were taken very seriously. We used to compare Purabi with Jagaran with Urmi, and we would congratulate ourselves that our hostel magazine is better than the magazine brought out by another hostel. For days we would be discussing these things. And I remember Girija Shankar Patnaik was the editor of Purabi, and I was the assistant editor or something. And we went all the way to Kalicharan Patnaik's house to find out the meaning of the significance of the Raga Purabi. What does it actually signify? And he told us that it's a rag which is sung in evenings. But earlier, so Dr. Mahatav had said that it's a morning rag, therefore young people should sing it or something like that. He said he knows nothing about music, so he has just said it off the cuff to please you, to make you feel good. So we went Jagannath Vallabh all the way from Ravenshaw to Kalicharan Patnaik's residence and found out what Purabi as a rag, as a melodic mode meant, signified. So this was an ecstatic time. we had it's not as if all our experiences were pleasant. There are many unpleasant experiences, a lot of violence in Ravenshaw. There's a lot of Gundaism in Ravenshaw, hooliganism. And I remember how, with great, incredible patience, Professor Mahendra Raut and his colleagues and associates pacified Ravenshaw, made it a more civilized place, and emergency came to the rescue, and Ravenshaw became a more disciplined place. And I remember that in New Hostel, actually the rooms were allotted by a local hooligan, and I got my room allotted through his good offices. So that's another story. But everyone was obsessed with finding his name in print, or most of us were. And we used to read every magazine that came out, particularly puja issues. We would wait for stories of Manoj Das, stories written by Gopinath Mahanti or Surendra Mahanti, and would devour them avidly, hungrily. So that milieu has disappeared. So I may be romanticizing the Ravenshaw I knew, although I fully recollect some very unpleasant episodes that took place. That it was a violent place in the first few years, between 71 and 75. It was a very, very violent and a violent place, full of uncertainties, but the memory that comes back to us most vividly are those of an exciting time, intellectually and emotionally, and great friendships were made. These friendships have lasted almost a lifetime because we are approaching the end of our lives. So all our great friends were Ravenshawians. And wherever we went, we found someone or the other who had been a friend of ours, either in the hostel or in our classes. So the great teachers, great friends, even the hostel boys, the hostel employees, the college employees, we formed an intimate bond with them. I would close by talking about one more aspect of that life, that I mentioned Cold War, and we were the greatest beneficiaries from an intellectual point of view, because I think I remember many of my contemporaries would remember a very fair-skinned person, short-statured. He would come to New Hostel, he must have gone to other hostels, and spread a blanket or a bed sheet or something, whatever, newspapers, and would sell English translations of Russian classics and Russian science textbooks at an incredibly cheap prices. And that was our introduction to Dostoevsky, Turgenev, Tolstoy, Herzen, Chekhov, Pushkin. So we bought these because, and sometimes we didn't even pay. We couldn't pay the price of those books, and he didn't mind to take 5 or 6 rupees and then give us 3 books, even when they would cost 10 rupees or 15 rupees. And I would close by talking about something that is very banal, but it wasn't banal to us. The wonderful taste of all the mutton cutlets and prawn cutlets and egg cutlets which vendors would bring to our hostels, and the taste was out of this world. And I feel guilty that sometimes we would buy on credit, and perhaps sometimes we didn't pay them. So thank you very much for your patience. It was a very random, incoherent account of my days in Ravenshaw. Thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for your patience. And thank you, Mr. Samantra and Mr. Tripathi, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to go down the memory lane and relive wonderful days that I and my friends had spent in Ravenshaw. Thank you very much.
We have some Q&A for now.
Oh, okay.
Hello. Yes. I shared the same space and time with Jatin Babu in Ravenshaw, so it was for me like reliving those wonderful days, beautiful days. But before thanking him for this excellent and exciting presentation, I would like to request our participants, if you have got any questions, any suggestions, or any response to his presentation, please ask him the questions, or you can put up your views also.
Yes, I would welcome comments, questions, and observations, because all of us have got
Yeah.
lived through that wonderful experience. So I would be enriched by your anecdotes and memories.
Yes. Please raise your hand, Akhya Mahanti. Unmute. Sudhanshu, please unmute Akhya Mahanti.
Yeah, I'm on mute now.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Jatindra Babu, बहुत बढ़िया अपन कहले माने it reminded me I was a student from 77 to 81. बहुत बड़ा अपन जो कहले प्रोफेसर बहुत बड़ा प्रोफेसर थिले हम टाइम रे भी थिले किंतु it was nostalgic माने to hearing you about almost the same time. I remember about the student strikes in 69 because मोर बड़ भाई माने भी पढुतले केतक टाइम रे मु भी देखि जे माने घर को रक्त देके आस्तिले गंडगोल करिकी. So I remember that 69 strikes, and I also remember that Pilu Modi jo kahitile the future chief minister of Odisha. I remember that was during the mane Ravenshaw gote stamp आगे स्टाफ मु आपन गोटे कथा को पचारिबे से क्वेश्चन नंबर होची जे आमे जतल 77 78 पसिलु रेवेन्शा I think the glory days of Ravenshaw was going little bit down because that time we got challenge from college like BJP college, Bhadrak college. They are also माने भलो तांको स्टूडेंट भी भलो बेस्ट एंटर आस्तले and they somehow challenge Ravenshaw. तापरे 81 I left Cuttack in 81. तापरे मो जानिनी is Ravenshaw still has that glorious past.
मु किछि दिन मोर जीवन रे गोटे दुख रहि गेला जे मो रेवेन्शा रे केतळे पढै परिवार सुजोग पाइ नथली. मु जो कथा कहूची सेटा भद्रक बीजेपी में जेते हलानी हमर जो बिलियाडी को जो मोहाइलु आमे समस्त आमे सब पळैथु आमे भी जेएनयू पळैथलु मु सना फेरी आसली किंतु जेएनयू जोगु हमर धीरे धीरे दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी जेएनयू प्रथमे पाटना आडू आरंभ होइतला तापर अलाहाबाद तापर जेएनयू जो हमर भला दरिद्र मेधावी पिला जो माने निम्न मध्यवित्त पिला से माने सेकंड क्लास रे पाइले मध्ये स्कॉलरशिप पाउतले रेवेन्शा रे फर्स्ट क्लास न पाइले स्कॉलरशिप रहउ नथला तेणु समस्ते चलिले दिल्ली समस्ते चलिले जेएनयू ताफଳରେ धीरे धीरे गोटे लागिला जे कोडे जाई परनी से रेवेन्शा रे पढुची तेणु से फीलिंग मध्ये हमर थिला किंतु आमे ताकू परे परे किंतु रेवेन्शा रे जो वंडरफुल टीचर्स थिले समाज साने संभाळी दउथिले तेणु आमे जीवन रे भर्ती करू तेणु आरा कथा रेवेन्शा रे मु जो पाठ पढियार सुजोग पाइ नथली बहु वर्ष परे पाइली एबे तो रिटायर कली मु विजिटिंग प्रोफेसर रेवेन्शा रे 2 वर्ष थिली सेति कोले मु देखिली जे रेवेन्शा होची गोटे शाଳ जंगल भलिया सेला रेवेन्शा रे अंडर ग्रेजुएट पिला होचंती जे कोनसी टॉप यूनिवर्सिटी पिलांग सत्रे समान भलो टीचर थांतु न थांतु दे विल डू वेल किंतु हमर जेहेतु रेवेन्शा कॉलेज रे 170 पोस्ट फिलअप हला नाही बहुत दिन पंत रेवेन्शा टा हेगला जो अधिकांश गोटे डिपार्टमेंट रे जोटी 25 जन इंग्लिश डिपार्टमेंट रे थिले 2 जन कि 3 जन टीचर रहिले रेवेन्शा कॉलेज टा हेगला जे कोनसी कॉलेज भलिया स्टेट रो बड़ करुण अवस्था हेगला तेणु पिला एबे भी भलो अछंती किंतु तांका पय टीचर ना काली भलो टीचर दे दियंतु अल्ताफ हुसैन भलिया दे दियंतु कि केएसआर मूर्ति दे दियंतु सर्वेश्वर दास सौभाग्य मिश्र दे दियंतु कि जीतू पटनायक कि जो माने मनान एसए मनान दे दियंतु से माने पूर्ण पृथ्वी जय कर दिबे तेणु रेवेन्शा टा गोटे से जो जंगल कहते गाई छाड़ंतुनी से जंगल पूर्ण जेता रूट रू उठिके तयारी हे जिवो मो रेवेन्शा विषय से धारणा रेवेन्शा टा पाठ पय एते इंपोर्टेंट नथिला हमर ऑनर्स रे म देखि मोटे 40 टा क्लास हेतिला किंतु सर्वेश्वर दास मते बाटरे मते चल चल जाउथलो से चिना बादाम टिके टिके दे दोथिबे कहि चलथिबे ता देहर जो गोटे सेंटेंस मोर एबे भी मने अछि जे क्लाइमेट ऑफ क्वेश्चनिंग से कहउथबे जे इमरजेंसी आसला क्लाइमेट ऑफ क्वेश्चनिंग ता चली गला ए क्लाइमेट ऑफ क्वेश्चनिंग मु आउ दीटा स्पीच रे यूज कर दे कि लोक एडमायर्ड ही कि म अल्ताफ हुसैन को पचारि सर टिके अमुक लोक विषय कहले से कहबे ओ तांको घरे बसथि से कहो इज अ मिक्सचर ऑफ मीडियोक्रिटी एंड मेलोड्रामा ए भलिया एक्सप्रेशन हम कहि दबु अने जगह रे तेणु ये भलिया जोटे आम्बियंस थिला से आम्बियंस ता खाली पाठ साथे नथिला ए जो सार्त्र प्लेटा हे जाउची कालीगुलाटा हे जाउची अक्षय मानते से प्रथम एफ गुण तमे गाउची रेवेन्शा रे से जो आम्बियंस कालीचरण पटनायक से वेस्ट हॉस्टल भाषण दउचंती गंगाधर था से कहउचंती तेणु से जो आम्बियंस ता चली गला तापरे वायलेंस पसिला तापरे खाली परीक्षा देले पिला तेणु रेवेन्शा रे सेटा खाली पाठ क्लासरूम तरे बहुत कम कथा होतिला क्लासरूम आरपटे गुड़िया कथा ही जाउतला सेटा बंद हे गला ए पिल्लीमोदी भाषण ता अपन मन रखछन पिल्लीमोदी भले लोक रेवेन्शा आसुनी आसले भी एते परीक्षा पडुची जे पिला सुनना कोन करिया दुखर कथा
आकार किछि कहिवार अछि बा पचारिवार अछि अक्षय बाबू तो कहले आउ के किछ कहय चाहउछंती
Deepak, are you able to hear me?
हां यस
ମୁଁ ଟିକେ add କରିବି ଅକ୍ଷୟ ବାବୁଙ୍କର ପ୍ରଶ୍ନରେ ଏବଂ
ହଁ।
ତାଙ୍କର ଯୋଉ ରେସ୍ପନ୍ସ ଦେଲେ ପ୍ରଫେସର ନାୟକ
Hmm.
ସେଥିରେ ଟିକେ add କରିବି because I had got the opportunity not only to be a student for 7 years like Professor Naik, but also had the opportunity to teach in Ravenshaw and retire from Ravenshaw. That
Oh, I envy you.
I have. So
Yeah.
I will not snatch away to give my response. The very good
Please.
question that was posed by Akshay sir. That as I agree with Professor Naik that Ravenshaw is Ravenshaw because of the students, including Professor Naik, not for teachers. Yes, we are obsessed. Most of us who are Ravenshawians are obsessed with Ravenshaw. Everything of Ravenshaw is good, starting from the bricks to everything that we find Ravenshaw, we cannot just remain without praising. But due to political interference, I don't know, during the time of my father, when there was only a couple of colleges, SCS and Puri, during 30s and 40s, maybe all good teachers were bound to come to Ravenshaw. But in 70s, as he was narrating, the political interference was so high that you can't just think that all good teachers will be there. Incidentally, maybe in English, some veteran teachers were there. But to my experience, I have never found in my science stream, being a student of chemistry who has made a spellbinding lecture during my career. But we adore everyone. I don't take the name of anybody. So it was because when I became a teacher, I found the means of entering into Ravenshaw College is through the back door, tapping the minister, paying money and so other things at that time. So that's why BJP, Ravenshaw, SCS, Bhadrak, they were no different because most of us, particularly Odiyas, they're so very humble, particularly for the teachers. They can fall down from the cycles and meet accidents. They're so very, simple and have reverence. So we are enamored and you are very, very proud of Ravenshaw, but I don't think unless and until, yes, the situation perhaps changed. Professor Naik will lend credence to my statement because he was very recently was a visiting professor. After it became a university and the selection was made on the basis of competence, brilliance, academic performance, I think the scenario must have changed. Until that time, the decadence was geometrically progressing. It was, from 70s onwards, the decadence, as Akshay sir has rightly pointed out, it was progressing in geometric proportion. And ultimately, the nature wanted to make a U-turn by making it a university, perhaps.
Yes,
can
I
tell
think university
that
will make a
that is
difference.
what is appearing to me as logical, because unless good people will be selected
Yes.
and the teaching will be made from them, it's not possible to expect, because of the red building, the glamour that is associated, that will not take away its
I absolutely agree with you. Yes.
thank you.
Okay, anyone else who wants to ask something or interact?
Deepavana, I have a question.
Ask it.
Okay.
Sure.
So, sir, this is Bikash here. So I stay in Bangalore and have been a Ravenshaw student for 3 years, from 1991 to 94, a student of commerce. And what I feel about my college is basically I've studied in both the places, in Ravenshaw as well as outside Ravenshaw, another university in Delhi. But then I feel a real connect when I learn about a person who is from Ravenshaw College, whether during my travel for being in US or in
Europe or in Southeast Asia countries, there are many students who belong to this institution. And what I feel now is in the current scenario, you have an opportunity where through this electronic meeting and this this webinars, we do have an opportunity to revive a certain amount of good quality education back into our university fraternity and academics, which we are reminiscing about the way the quality of the teachings were. I think a lot of people who have traveled out now have a lot of experience. They can become and also distant teachers and upgrade, because going forward the things are going to change dynamically and colleges are adapting to these scenarios. I possibly Sudhanshu sir, Jatindra sir and Deepak bhai, I think that is the right course we need to take in, suggest to the management that this online education is going to definitely re-evolve Ravenshaw into a much more better place and a education institution.
Right. Thank you. Yes, Jatindra.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with this. No
Vikas.
institution can remain static for very long. Every institution must evolve and cope with the changing times. And I think our love we must make sure that the intense love we feel for our institutions is translated into concrete terms. Because when I look at Presidency University or institutions in Bengal, their alumni actually try to contribute in very concrete terms. Whereas we always pay lip service to the institution which we adore and we feel connect with. And then when it comes to contributing something in very real terms, we flinch or we step back. So Ravenshaw, even today, we don't have a database on all the alumni of Ravenshaw. I mean, this is such a sad state of affairs. Thousands of Ravenshawians are doing well all over the world, but we don't know anything about them. And there is an alumni association which hasn't been able to prepare a database. So I think IITs are benefiting from their alumni base, and president of the Jadavpur University, Presidency University have immensely benefited from. For instance, Presidency has a mentor group which includes Amartya Sen, Sugata Bose, people like that. Abhijit Banerjee now, the Nobel laureate in economics. So we have to translate our intense adoration for our institution, for Ravenshaw, into very concrete terms. And all of you are vastly, I think, equipped, very well equipped to do something concrete. I don't spare myself. I haven't also done anything. So let's think of doing something on this online education, and Ravenshaw benefiting from it is a wonderful idea. Now we can get people from Harvard, from Oxford, from Cambridge to teach without paying for their airfare. So this is a great opportunity which we should take advantage of. So our ideas should now take some concrete shape, material shape, and we should do whatever we can. I have talked to the present Vice Chancellor, is a highly motivated person. And if we actually have anything concrete to offer, I think he will certainly respond warmly and in a very, very positive way. So let's do something in very concrete terms. That's what only thing that I can think of.
Rightly said. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I think there are no more questions, but one thing I would like to add is, as Professor Nayak said, the alumni and university interface right now is in a pitiable state. Though there is Ravenshaw Development Trust, there is an alumni association, but the interface leaves much to be desired. We should strengthen that, and I'm sure Ravenshaw did have a glorious past, and Ravensshaw's present also has got a lot of promise. And if we can connect the dots rightly, I'm sure the future is going to be a better one. much better than the present one. So I take this opportunity to thank Professor Nayak, in spite of not being in town and denying himself the pleasure of the OD Art hospitality, to join in and talk so well and so exceedingly well, rather. I've been always an admirer of his storytelling, as I told you in the beginning. He narrated it so well. And because Sudhanshu and me, we lived in the same space and time, that is the 70s of Ravenshaw, we share a lot of things with him, and we are reminded of those things. I'm sure Ravenshaw, as it is right now, has got the potential. The challenge is in harnessing it properly. So thank you, Professor Nayak. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Ladies and
Anything for Ravenshaw? Anything for you?
Yes. Yes, Jatindra.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's call it a day.
Yeah.
Okay, all of us
Sudhanshu.
we are signing out. So, okay, it's a very fascinating lecture. And I was really impressed with the narration skill that Professor Nayak has. Superb, fantabulous. So with this,
Good night.